Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and welcome back to Rare Variants. This is a series that I used to do a little bit more of, and I kind of abandoned it for a while, but hey, it's back. Basic premise of this particular show is that there's a whole lot of video game consoles in the world, as we all probably know, and a lot of them, the ones we like the most, that were big successes, also typically, in a lot of cases, would have these weird mutant versions that would either be very limited by their original company, or some other company would get involved and make some sort of strange version. So in the past, I've covered the Divers 2000 Sega Dreamcast, which was a television with a Dreamcast built into it. The Sony PSX, which was a PlayStation 2 with a hard drive and a DVR system. The Mountain Dew Xbox, and the Orange Spice GameCube, which admittedly is not really that rare. It's just that they were rare to Americans because they only came out in Japan. But I even think I put the Nintendo PlayStation prototype in there too, even though that one doesn't really count, nor do I own that, certainly. But while I certainly do not have every single one of these offshoot weird versions of a console, I do have some, and I thought it would be kind of cool to go back and start looking at some of them. Since I covered those consoles recently, and while there are more like oddball variants of some of those, I wanted to cover a console I hadn't done any sort of Rare Variants video on at all, and that would be the Sega Saturn. It was at this moment that I realized not only had I done a video on the Philips CDI development kit that I threw into this playlist, but I had also done a video on the Sega Pluto prototype, which would be a version of the Sega Saturn. My bad. In fact, there's another video of that coming eventually that I did with Ben Heck. You can see one half of that on his channel. My half of it I couldn't finish because it requires me to go out to California and finish it, but with the current crisis that we're all kind of dealing with, yeah, the video remains unfinished. Anyway, while the Sega Saturn is not always considered the biggest hit, it was a great console with a lot of awesome gaming experiences on it, but in North America and Europe it was just kind of, it just didn't last very long. It was only around for a couple of years, but this isn't a video about the history of the Saturn, but it is to say that in those two regions in particular, you didn't really get any sort of special editions. We just kind of got the Model 1 and the Model 2, and that's about it. But in Japan, on the other hand, was vastly more successful with the Sega Saturn, and not only did they have multiple versions, as you can see some of them in front of you here, they had a bunch that I don't have on this table. Some that I do have that maybe I'll do videos on one day. But this isn't even just to talk about, oh, the base Model 1 Sega Saturn and the base Model 2 Sega Saturn, although we'll take just a quick look at them just because I think they're important for context purposes. This was the Model 1 Sega Saturn. Ours was black, but it had the oval design. The Model 1 was how the console originally launched. Later on, in an effort to do some cost cutting, they changed the design up. They got rid of the access light and some other things and streamlined that process a little bit, ultimately resulting in the Model 2. This went on to become the visual inspiration for the Dreamcast, by the way. But yes, it's a very stark difference between the Model 1 and the Model 2 in Japan. In our case, at least in North America, and I think Europe was like this as well, both versions were just black. So really, it was just like, do you like oval buttons or circular buttons? It wasn't cosmetically super exciting like it was in Japan. Most people seem to agree that they like the Model 1 better just because the access light, and they just seem to like the design of it overall. But that's not the super important part. What we're here to talk about today is something known as the V-Saturn, or Victor Saturn. What I have in front of me, not surprisingly, the focus of the video. The Victor Saturn Model 1 and the Victor Saturn Model 2. Now, I acquired both of these in Japan myself. They're actually relatively cheap these days. I mean, as far as these oddball variants of consoles that come out, the Victor Saturn is actually not that hard to get. There were actually surprisingly a lot of these released, and it actually did pretty well. So information on this particular variant, why it exists, is kind of scarce, to be honest. There doesn't seem to be any sort of amazing story behind it. There's just some factual information, and then we can get into some speculation. Basically, here's what we do know. In the early 90s, when Sega was absolutely thriving with the Genesis in North America and doing well with the Mega Drive in Europe, they actually weren't doing that well with the Mega Drive in Japan. And by the end of it, the Mega Drive was actually not a particularly big hit over in Japan. I mean, even to this day, like, I've been to Japan a lot of times and while I'm there, I try to pick up a bunch of like retro gaming stuff. You'll find various Saturns like everywhere, but what you'll almost never find is Mega Drive stuff. It's really uncommon. I'm not going to say rare, but it's uncommon. Like, to the point where you see one, you're like, wasn't expecting that, because like it just doesn't come up very much. So in the case of Japan, Sega had actually had a bunch of flops kind of consecutively. They released the SG-1000, which never came out here. I'd done a video on that, and it flopped. They ended up bringing out the Sega Mark III, which actually did decently, enough so that they mutated that and turned that into the Sega Master System, which we're talking about just Japan, by the way. But in Japan, the Sega Master System, not a hit. I think I've seen like 1 or 2 of those over there ever. And then after that, they got the Mega Drive, which, as I just said, wasn't really successful. Then they had the Sega CD or Mega CD, also not particularly successful. So in the early 90s, during the Mega Drive and Mega CD era, at one point, Sega approached Victor. Now, you guys would probably know them by another name, JVC, or I believe it's Japan Victor Company. And so they got together with them and said, like, do you want to collaborate together to make like a high-end, you know, version of our Mega Drive and Mega CD products? Because at the time, in particular, Victor or JVC was very well known for high-quality electronics. And Victor took them up on it, and that's how you got the Wonder Mega. In fact, there was also a Sega version of the Wonder Mega, and ultimately the Wonder Mega, one of the Wonder Megas, was brought over here as the JVC XI. That was, as far as I know, JVC's one and only attempt at a home game console in North America, and that was really just a Sega Genesis and a Sega CD combined into a single unit. But because of that situation, there was a relationship between Victor and Sega. Now, as it turns out, the Wonder Mega actually did fairly decently for what it was intended to do in Japan. The expectation wasn't exactly huge, but it seemed to not only get to it, but exceed it. JVC, or Victor, was very successful in marketing that particular platform to people who weren't necessarily going to buy a Mega Drive or buy a Sega CD, but really just saw Victor more as a high-quality electronics experience, entertainment experience, more so than a video game experience. And so when it came to the Saturn, that was one of the plans that Sega had. Sega went into it, again, you have to understand this. Context is everything on this. Well, when the Saturn was coming out in North America and Europe, they had just come off the heels of the Genesis, one of the most popular consoles of all time. Granted, the Sega CD and the 32X hurt their image, but there was some residual like love there, and they could have, in concept, maybe have turned that around with different marketing. Obviously, they ultimately didn't, but in Japan, the situation was different. In Japan, it was multiple flops in a row. And so Sega was trying to hedge their bets a little bit. They approached Victor and said, do you kind of want to do the same thing again? You know, we're making this thing called the Saturn. Why don't we hook you up? You'll basically make your own version of the console, and you'll, you know, market it your own way. And we'll just kind of take money from the licensing stuff, and then, you know, you get to make hardware. That was more or less the deal that Sega made with them. Now, at the same time, one thing that's really weird about that, though, is that they decided to keep making their own version of the console. Ultimately, they did make the Sega Saturn. And that's strange to an extent, because on November 22nd, 1994, the Sega Saturn Model 1 launched in Japan. And on the exact same day, the Victor V-Saturn Model 1 launched in Japan. Now, the reason I say this is strange is, historically speaking, there's only really 2 ways to have done this. There was either you make your own console and then you license it out to another company during its run for X, Y, and Z reasons. It could be production shortages and you need another company to come in and help you out, and one of the conditions of that is rebranding. That could have been a possibility. You could just kind of hide your own name from the product if you think your name is tainted, and put it under a different company's name just to, you know, basically get into the good graces. This is something that I think might have been on their minds at one point with the V-Saturn, because again, Sega's name as far as consoles was not good in Japan. And so but Victor's was, as just quality electronics. So at the time, Sony was entering with the PlayStation, and Victor was just, it was just kind of the attitude and the environment was changing. Game companies were seen a little bit more as like children's type of things, whereas major electronics companies were seen as like more legitimate. So there could have been a strategy where Sega would be like, all right, we're just going to back off and let it look like it's Victor's console when really it's ours. That could have been a strategy at some point, but And that's not even without precedent. There was a point, by the way, when Sega was releasing the Dreamcast where the same situation had occurred. Their name was more or less garbage in console games, so they had considered releasing the Dreamcast without ever putting the word Sega on it. Like, that's where they had reached. So it's not impossible to think they might have had the same idea with the Victor, although that's not ultimately how history played out. Because ultimately they did both at the same time. The other scenario you might want to have another company do something like this is a simple licensing matter, like the Samsung Saturn. That was the version that came out in South Korea. At the time, you couldn't have, Japanese companies were simply not allowed to sell products of Japanese products, specifically in South Korea. So you had to find a local company to take responsibility for it, and that's how you got the Samsung Saturn. The Hitachi Saturn, which also came out, was another effort to make kind of a Rolls-Royce version of the Saturn. What you would basically do in both cases, with the V-Saturn and the Hitachi Saturn, Sega, again, trying to hedge their bets, they could let those companies take some of the responsibility financially for the creation of it and just kind of market it towards different audiences. Hitachi would have appealed more to like the technology people who are just more into tech as opposed to video games, and the V-Saturn might have appealed more to low-end tech people who are not necessarily into video games, but like just kind of, I don't know, I want an entertainment center in my house. Because they really marketed this thing more like it was for VCD cards, or so you could play your VCDs on it. It would have MPEG support, and it'd have photo CD support. Now, amusingly, it did support the card, both of them did. Neither of them came packed with it. The Hitachi Saturn, funny enough, did. Now, those cards will work on a Model 1 or Model 2 Japanese normal Saturn, but basically, what ultimately came of all of this, what I'm trying to say, is that Sega approached the Saturn with their name on it for gamers. Hitachi approached it for like high-end electronics people, and I mean to the point where they even made one that was a functional GPS system. But Victor approached it more as just like the consumer-grade piece of technology entertainment center for your home. They just went towards different markets. Now, again, that's what ultimately happened. But what I find strange about that is you would think that they would have just picked one strategy, because it almost feels like they went with strategy A, which was our name is bad, so let's let Victor go out there for a little bit, and then we'll just kind of get money off of the game sales for a while it's really our hardware. And then maybe like at some point somebody decided, do we really want to have a console that doesn't have our name on it? That seems weird. But they were too far along with the V-Saturn and too far along with the High Saturn, so they just kind of had three going at once. Now, they are ultimately all interchangeable. That's the other thing that's strange about it too, is that there's really nothing else to it. See, when it comes to these like rare variant consoles, they usually do something unique. Like the Divers 2000 Dreamcast looks nothing like a Dreamcast, and it's a fully functional television. The PSX is a fully functional HDVR. Well, it was functional at some point. They're notorious for not being functional. A DVR system. A lot of those have some special oddity to it. The Victor Saturn doesn't do anything particularly interesting. When you just want to look at it, cosmetically it looks very different. It looks very nice. It's a darker gray than the original Model 1 Saturn, and it's two-tone, so the top is a different color than the bottom, but it's a subtle difference. It doesn't say Sega anywhere on it. It's all replaced by Victor. So if you had never heard of Sega before, you would have no reason to think that this was their console. But internally, it's almost all the same stuff, if not exactly identical. And that's the same goes for the Model 2. Again, it's just a redesign, a repaint, if you will, of the Model 2. Just never denotes that Sega ever made it or had anything to do with it whatsoever. It almost looks like some sort of weird knockoff, but it's 100% legit. Same with the controllers. This is the same controller 4 times with just different color schemes. So that's the Model 1 controller. That's the Victor Model 1. This is actually a harder controller to find, I noticed. In Japan, I could find the Victor Model 2 controller relatively easily. This is the only one of the Victor Model 1 controllers I ever found it came with the console. And then the Model 2 controller over here, very common as well. Now, when it comes hardware-wise, from a functionality standpoint, 100% the same. It's Japanese region coding, plays all the same games. There's nothing special about it. It's not like it has extra RAM or anything special in it. The only difference from a hardware operational perspective is the BIOS screen. The Sega Saturn had a very specific BIOS, but the V-Saturn had one all its own, very unique to itself. Does it make any real difference? No. It's literally just a boot up splash screen. That's it. That's the only thing that's different about it from the purposes of use. But I mean, it's interesting. Like, you look at the console and it straight up refers to itself as a multi-amusement player. Like I said, that's what Victor was going for, was not the game console market, but the entertainment market. Kind of think of it as a very early Xbox One. But except it can't play DVDs, it doesn't do streaming, none of that stuff existed, so the idea was to market it more towards the VCD crowd, while neglecting to actually include the required VCD card. You know, I looked through some of the marketing materials for this thing, and again, you know, that's just what they were going for, was just kind of being like, hey, you know, this isn't for gamers. I mean, it plays your games, it's fine, but don't forget, if you also want to watch movies and stuff, like, it can do that, you just need the extra parts, because all their marketing surrounded that. So, in the end, you know, there was no Model 3 of this. Like I said, Hitachi went on to make a very unique version of the Sega Saturn that had a functional GPS in it. When I tried looking into that to see if Victor had ever thought about doing that, it turns out at one point they did consider it, which to me lends credibility to two things. One, that they should have probably made their own version that would have made it more worthwhile to have a special. I mean, these are the guys that made the Wonder Mega. They wanted something that looked just completely different. So it's odd to me they never did that. But the reason I think they never did that, cost effectiveness aside, because it obviously would be cheaper to just use Sega's components and Sega's molds, is that I believe somewhere in there is, at some point, either someone will talk about this or it's true and just nobody will admit to it. I have to believe at some point Victor was under the impression that Sega wasn't going to release their own version of the console, and that they would basically do what I was talking about, where Sega's next console just has Victor's name all over it. And if that's the case, then there's no reason to do a redesign, because it's not going to have any competition. But by the time Sega was like, you know, or let them know that they were going to do it, you know, it's too late to do a redesign. That's speculation. I'm not saying that happened. That's pure speculation, but it kind of would make sense. But then again, the counter argument to that is simply like, dude, it's much more cost effective to use all the same assets to this, and that is definitely true. But hey, the conspiracy hat, you got to put it on for a second and just kind of wonder, because again, Victor, like I said, Victor was known for making weird things, weird redesigns, and Hitachi ended up doing it too. The V-Saturn was successful enough that, like I said, in Japan, I've seen these multiple times, and they're not even that expensive, so it obviously sold well enough that, you know, Victor could have done another. But then again, you have to argue, if it was selling well, why would they mess with that? If it's not broke, don't fix it. So, there you go. I don't think there's much else to really say about it. Like I said, if you want to get one now, it's not that hard to find. They're neat. They definitely are cool. It's an oddball thing to have in a Saturn collection, but beyond that, you know, it's just a cool little item. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this look at the V-Saturn or Victor Saturn. If you want to see more videos like this, let me know. I mean, what do you guys think of all these options? Because I mean, ultimately, this strategy, if you want to call it a strategy, did work. The Sega Saturn was the most successful console Sega ever had in Japan. It just was. It was actually a surprisingly big hit over there. So, you know, how much of that was this idea of coalescence, or was it just Sega doing a really good job? How much of it did Victor really accommodate for? How much of the market share was increased because of Victor's or Hitachi's involvement? Honestly, I don't know, because those kind of records are a tad sealed. But I'm curious, what do you guys think? Which strategy to you makes the most sense? Like, obviously we know what did happen, but we just don't know how it happened. So what do you guys think? I want to hear it from you. Let me know. If you guys could also please like, comment, and subscribe, I appreciate that. Thank you very much for watching. Check the social media stuff in the description. Please follow me on all that. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all later.